hybrid terrain. Excellent. Got it. Okay. As designers and thinkers, we endeavor to build in ways that lead toward justice, and we are committed to working to dismantle the ongoing consequences of settler colonialism and to restore the whole people to the full enjoyment of their rights and heritage. Okay, so now I just would also continue to acknowledge William Brinkman-Clark. There you are, William, with whom our visiting scholar this semester and with whom I have put together this lecture. And to say that Gabriel Díaz Montemayor will be our speaker tonight. Professor Catherine Siebert-Nordenson, the director of the graduate program in landscape architecture, newly fully accredited by the Landscape Architecture Accrediting Board, will give an introduction in just a minute. And I would also just to remind you of the title of Gabriel's talk. It is called Finding and Operationalizing Common Ground in the U.S.-Mexico Border Region. So please, Catherine, for an introduction. Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Martha. I'm gonna lean in. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. All right. Good evening. Buenas tardes, buenas noches, everyone, and welcome. Bienvenidos to the Fall 2022 Border Crossing Lecture Series. I'm Catherine Siebert-Nordenson, professor here at the school and director of the Master of Landscape Architecture program. This evening, we're delighted to welcome Professor Gabriel Díaz Montemayor, who joins us from the Landscape Architecture program at the Fay Jones School of Architecture and Design at the University of Arkansas. Our series theme of border crossing is especially apt for Professor Montemayor, who hails from the great state of Chihuahua in Mexico. Professor Montemayor crosses disciplines as well as political borders, having studied architecture at the University Autónoma de Chihuahua as an undergraduate and landscape architecture at the Auburn University in Atlanta as a graduate student, where he received his Master of Landscape Architecture in 2007. In addition to his teaching at the Fay Jones School of Architecture, Professor Montemayor is the Assistant Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. He's a founding partner of the practice Labor, Landscape Architecture Border Studio, based in Chihuahua City, Mexico since 2002. His research and teaching is concentrated in the advocacy and development of a landscape architecture specific to Latin American regions. Professor Montemayor's studio teaching is focused on multi-scalar and polyvalent research and service learning projects for the border region between the United States and Mexico. It ranges from the watershed scale to the urban scale to the street. Project locations often straddle the border of the Rio Grande, Rio Bravo, including Ambas Nogales, Hermosillo, sorry, I'm working on this, Hermosillo, Ciudad Juarez, and Chihuahua City. In advance of this talk, and in the spirit of such transnational and ecological thinking at the border, I was delighted to find myself in the high desert of Western Texas just last weekend at Marfa, a reconnaissance mission for an upcoming concrete shed and landscape restoration project with the Judd Foundation. When in Texas, where I weirdly find myself often, I always like to see the river or attempt to see the river. I've had great success in Brownsville, Matamoros, the easternmost border crossing at the Sabal Palm Sanctuary. Don't miss it. El Paso, Ciudad Juarez at the western corner of South Texas offers a few vistas as well. Last Saturday, with a few free hours, we set off on I-67 south from Marfa to the border crossing at Presidio Ojinaga. Along the way, just after wondering why an oncoming pickup was flashing its brights at us, we got pulled over by the state police for speeding. It was only 79 in the 70, which I don't think is that bad. But we were quickly identified as New Yorkers with Florida plates on a rental car. We were asked why we were here, to see friends in Marfa, and where we were headed. Presidio, I said, to see the river. Probably not a smart thing to say. The cop raised an eyebrow, repeating, to see the river, but surprisingly let us off easy with just a warning. There are many layers to a border, as many of you know all too well. And though we got close, we never did see the river. Bridge Road at the border crossing was fenced off with USDA cattle pens, and the parallel unpaved riverine road, TX 170, never quite got us close enough for a view before it was washed out by an arroyo. What we did get, however, was a Border Patrol pickup truck escort back up to I-67 until we turned off at Marfa. For some spectacular riverine views, however, I would encourage everyone to check out the artist Zoe Leonard's amazing new project, Al Rio to the Rio, now on view at Chelsea at the Hauser and Wirth Gallery on West 22nd Street, a 6-year undertaking by Leonard in which she photographed the 1,200-mile stretch along the Rio Grande, Rio Bravo that demarcates the border from El Paso, Ciudad Juarez, to the Gulf of Mexico. Like Leonard, Professor Montemayor's work considers deeply both the conflation and the boundaries of natural and political edges as they manifest in the landscape. Design and our occupation of the landscape, we cannot forget, is a political act. I'm very happy to welcome Gabriel this evening, con mucho gusto, as he presents his work at this ecologically considered common ground with a talk entitled Finding, Operationalizing Common Ground in the US-Mexico Border Region. Bienvenidos and welcome to Gabriel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and thank you, Marta, for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here with you. This is only my second time in New York City as well, and it's always nice to see this fantastic place. Also, thank you very much for the organization of the lecture series, and the curation of this group of colleagues and friends who are visiting your school in the coming weeks and months. Okay. Well, finding and operationalizing common ground in the US-Mexico border region. I'll start first with a very quick introduction. I'll try to go through some initial slides explaining what was already described, where I come from, and a little bit on the general contextual situation of the US-Mexico border, concentrating in more so on socio-political, economical conditions, more so than the obvious fact that we share the land. And then I will go through a number of projects in which I have participated as an academic, as a practitioner, and also sort of in between. And in many of those projects also, many of my students have also participated and of course enhanced and contributed to the development of these ideas. So I was looking at this map and I realized that I have to update the map because New York didn't make the cut in this map. But generally speaking, this is where I have been most of the time. I was born in Guadalajara to parents from Mexico City and was raised in Chihuahua City. Came to the United States studying Auburn, which also didn't make the map or the cut. And then spent some years teaching at Arizona State University, then at UT Austin, and then now in Northwest Arkansas in the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. I guess the point is also to try to put together a constellation of sorts with regard to the importance of the work that I do with where I have been operating most of my time. So with regards to quick context, frontera or border, I come from the city of Chihuahua, which is fundamentally, I think, a cultural hybrid, right? It's far away enough from Mexico City that people from northern Mexico in general, but from places like Chihuahua, which is probably certainly not as big or hegemonic as Monterrey, which is bigger and wealthier, right? There's a very sort of a sense of isolation, which is quite strong, which in many ways resembles the sense of isolation of the Southwest, right? Being very far away from the coasts, right? And of course sharing what generally speaking is a harsh environment, not arid or semi-arid, difficult to take out a living from this landscape. There's also, the layers of history, in which case here, for example, I'm just showing you some images of downtown Chihuahua City, which fundamentally is defined by the origin of colonialism and, of course, the suppression of the native people that inhabited this land. I also have developed a relationship with the border condition, which I have to position from my condition of privilege, given that I enjoy that socioeconomic status, which, for example, granted me the ability to have tourist visas so that we could come often to the United States to shop, to concerts, to whatever, right? To spend weekends. From Chihuahua City to El Paso, Texas, it's just a 3.5-hour drive, and it's something very common, which I did multiple times. But it's also interesting to see that for a long time, the border was like this, and it was just a wire mesh fence, which at some point just ended, right? And I took that photo right, when I was visiting, in one of my visits to the border with my students, when visiting the border was probably not so much problematic, right? Of course, there were border patrol cars, getting closer as what is this group of people doing there, but it was probably, I wouldn't expect the same response today, right? Of course, there's a very different fence, and this is impossible today, right? This is very close to a Sunland Park in New Mexico, which is part of the metropolitan area of El Paso, Texas, and that is one of the border markers established by the agreements between the United States and Mexico to set up the border. And so literally, this was possible about 20 years ago, right? And of course, nowadays, this is not possible. I also come from a socioeconomic context, which is highly defined by the economic trade relationship between the United States and Mexico and Canada. And in the last couple of decades in particular, in Mexico, there has been quite an impressive urbanization. A lot of that urbanization happened through the implementation of a very aggressive program of subsidized housing, which was done like this, right? With very little care with the natural environment, with the land. It's just about a formulaic approach to find the profit for developers. The housing is sold through subsidized credits, through the several state institutions that exist in Mexico to do this. And I continue to be amazed always by this little corner of the development, right? Which is like you couldn't help yourself, right? You just have to cut through, right? That was the opportunity to integrate, to provide with higher quality of life and even mobility options to what nonetheless continues to be an isolated, marooned subdivision in the outskirts of the city of Monterrey. So this oblivious relationship between urbanization and the environment is something that has always been part of my interest. Another important thing to say about arid, semi-arid northern Mexico is that there is, unfortunately, there is really a very slowly emerging recognition of the beauty, the value of the land, of the landscape, of nature, right? The typical reaction of people is that reaction that we're looking at here with regards to housing and landscape, right? What do you mean this is valuable? I don't understand why this is valuable, right? This is just a scrubland, right, with very little value. I think it's little by little changing, but just not enough, right? Especially after having spent some years in Arizona and in the Phoenix metropolitan region, where the embracement of the Sonoran landscape is a reality, even more so in Tucson, Arizona, right? That embracement is yet to happen, right? So everything that it's valuable and worthy is something, but it's not that, right? It has to be, again, a green, irrigated lawn with the typical commercial plant and tree species, which of course are non-native. When you say let's do native planting, well, first of all, people look at you like, what do you mean? You know, why? How is that valuable, right? When you can find that tree just out there. And then if you manage to convince for that approach, then the problem is going to be to find the actual supply of native plants and trees, right? Which is also something that is very slowly emerging. So very quickly, an asymmetric relationship between Mexico and the US, right? We know, there's a very large economy versus a large economy. Mexico is about the economy number 14, 15 globally, right? So it's a wealthy country, comparatively speaking, with the rest of the world, but inequalities are unfortunately very, very significant, and of course the distribution of that wealth is very unequal. There's of course also this situation, speaking about the US-Mexico border region, where you have asymmetries related to, for example, the power of economies such as that one of California and Texas, the asymmetry between population, the very important thing, the lingering complicated relationship between Mexico and the United States. Fundamentally, we have a very, a history of booms and busts, right? This is one of the illustrations by Carl Neville, who was an artist in one of the military expeditions into Mexico during the US-Mexico War. And this is an illustration of American troops in the Zócalo of Mexico City. And you see the American flag on top of what today is the National Palace, where the Mexican president lives, right? And by the way, this person in the lower left is about picking up a stone to throw the stone to the occupation force. And this is a place as it is today, right? That's the exact same corner, right? So it's complicated. Right? There's baggage to the relationship, right? There's another interesting situation between Mexico and the US is that northern Mexico is, generally speaking, comparatively speaking, wealthier than the rest of Mexico, right? In the case of the US, well, I commented on Texas and California, but there are also along the US-Mexico border region, very, very poor areas, especially concentrated in southern Texas, right? And of course, as you may imagine as well, also concentrated around the reservations, so especially located in Arizona and also in Sonora today. Old Mexico Lives On, a map published by The Economist a few years ago, in which we can see the relationship of Mexican origin population by county, and that against the pre-1848 border established after the United States defeated Mexico in that 2-year war. Other things that are on the contrary, symmetrical, right? This is the route of a 10K race that has been happening for a number of years between Ciudad Juárez and El Paso, right? You actually run part of the 10K in El Paso and another part of the 10K in Ciudad Juárez, right? That's the border there. And in the 2016 edition, you can see here Beto O'Rourke, who currently is trying to become governor of Texas, with Javier Corral, who at the time was the state governor of Chihuahua. And the hat is what you can read, right? The border makes America great. At the point I want to make here with regards to the symmetries or, enhanced relationships is that the lower you go in the political governance, right, the farther away you go from the federal rhetoric and the closer you get to the border, in other words, that relationship significantly changes, right? And there is much more common ground, politically speaking. There is much more common ground between Republicans and Democrats here in the US, the more local they are, right? You get far away from that, and then the situation kind of flips over, right? So shared environments, and sharing is complicated. Well, of course, we know that we share watersheds, and those watersheds are sectioned off by the political border. There's two main watersheds. The first one is the Rio Grande, Rio Bravo watershed. By the way, I'll make a note here. We do not agree on a name. In Mexico is the Rio Bravo. In the United States is the Rio Grande. And the other large watershed is the Rio Colorado. This is or the Colorado River. Another map. There are many ways to, so one important thing is to identify, okay, so where is the border region? What do we mean when we say border region? Is it the watersheds, or is it the, for example, the EPA has implemented for a number of years a program which is called Border 2010, 2020, etc. A program which funds projects related to the environment, and it's a joint program between the Mexican equivalent of the EPA. In that case, the border region is defined by 100 kilometers into each one of the countries, right? Which is about 60 miles into each one of the countries. So if we map that, and also including to the mapping the border states, you may know, I don't know if you know this, but there is a conference of governors, border governors between the United States and Mexico that sort of get together, not very consistently, depending on the political atmosphere. It hasn't happened, but there is a group, and they do get together so often to discuss this. So watersheds, the funding of environmental projects, the boundaries of state governments, or more specifically, water, right? There's a historic record of agreements between the United States and Mexico for the management of water, but the most significant treaty that I want to talk about is that one from 1944, in which the US and Mexico agreed on the sharing of water from these two main watersheds. Fundamentally, it goes like this: the Colorado River being most of the watershed in the United States, there is an agreement for the US to give Mexico a significant amount of water for for agriculture and for the cities located where the Colorado River used to reach to the Gulf of California or the Sea of Cortez, right? Not so much anymore. There is a program that has been implemented to release water back so that the delta can be slowly recovered, but most of the water is taken up before it reaches the Gulf of California or the Sea of Cortez. So in exchange of that water, Mexico, you can see here the footprint of that agriculture. This is Mexicali, a city of about 1 million people, very intensive agriculture in what otherwise, as you can see, was a very distinctive fertile delta versus a very arid environment, or as you can see, quite literally a desert. Right? but we have a problem, right? Because while Mexico provides, in exchange of that, Mexico provides water to the United States, mostly coming from the Conchos River Basin, which is located, most of it, in the state of Chihuahua. And it sounds like we give you that, and in exchange, you give us that. But the problem is that as it has happened a number of times, but more recently in 2020, there have been drought periods which have made of Mexico being unable to pay or to deliver the water that was agreed upon with the United States through this treaty. So we have a problem. Right? There's of course a number of measures that are designed to address the fact that this is not an environment where you have a lot of rainfall. So the water payments need to be done every 5 years, and then if you are unable to pay the debt, there is a mechanism to kind of extend it to another 5-year cycle, etc. Right? That's taken into account, but that water in the case of the state of Chihuahua, of course, supports the agricultural activities of the state of Chihuahua, also in a semi-arid environment. As you can see, this is one of the water reservoirs which were built in an agreement between the United States and Mexico to manage the binational water. And with drought, very recently a problem happens, right? There's Mexico tried to release water from the reservoirs to pay debt to the United States, but the local farmers in Chihuahua don't want that to happen because they also are going through that drought, right? So in 2020, the military in Mexico tried to open the gates to pay water to the US. The Mexican farmers from the state of Chihuahua opposed that opening, and violence erupted, and one woman was killed in a gunfire exchange related to this situation. Right? So the point being that people are dying because of this, and who knows what's coming, right? If this situation continues to happen. So propositions. Okay. So I'm going to present to you projects located in these red points. I'm going to start first with a project located right in the border in Ciudad Juárez. Fundamentally, because I believe this project, at least for our practice, this was done a while ago. It was a project that started in 2005. For our practices, it was the opportunity, or quite literally the first opportunity, to engage with and be reflective about the role of public space, and in particular the political capacity of public space. Right? We were tasked with developing our public space master plan for downtown Juárez, which historically has been defined by that relationship with El Paso. Ciudad Juárez, of course, named after President Benito Juárez, who is the most important Mexican president. Who was president of Mexico during the Civil War here in the US. And El Paso actually is kind of short for Paso del Norte, which is the original name of this settlement. And Paso means pass. It was a narrow in the river, which was easier to cross here when the river was actually a river, right? So in that relationship, and acknowledging the presence of traditional economic activities, the need to reactivate and reconnect these activities to public space, the potential connections with former irrigation networks, which were no longer irrigating because the farmlands were urbanized. We developed a master plan trying to pull people in from El Paso, also trying to recover tourist flows that were already being lost due to the beginning of the war on drugs, which was pretty much officially started in year 2006. But at the time, there were already very little American tourists actually walking into downtown Juárez. we developed a first phase all the way down to architectural design documents, and only 2 pieces were actually implemented. I'm going to concentrate on the historical square, which is the first park with monument honoring President Benito Juarez in the city bearing his name. It used to be something like this, a very traditional layout of plaza or plaza park in Mexico. We decided to revert the geometry, create an amphitheater for political and cultural gatherings, but also at the same time to manage the rainfall, manage water into this depression. This is as it was finished in 2006. But the most important thing is the lesson throughout the project as an opening of a space with a political capacity, which was not really there. If you may remember, the aerial photo was pretty much a monument with garden areas around it. Opening that space in particular has enabled proximity and capacity for political activities like this one. Or like this one, this is the current Mexican president when he was campaigning in 2018. I just wanted to show you this because of the Palo Verdes that are doing well in the background. I'm joking. No, I think it's a testament of the power of public space and our responsibility, of course, as designers to produce these spaces and to go for it, because we did struggle a lot with getting the permitting happen as we were proposing something that was going against the historical diagram of the park, right? And of course, a place not just for politicians to make demonstrations or presentations or meetings, but also for the people to demand justice. In this case, this happened during the darkest days of violence in Ciudad Juarez around 2008, 2009, when there were dozens of killings every day in Juarez. So a shared environment from the bottom up. Another important thing to contextualize is that I was commenting on the role of where you are whenever you're thinking of the implementation of projects, right? Farther away or closer to the ground. Something that has happened recently in Mexico is relatively recently with the 21st century has been the decentralization of planning, which in other words translates to taking out from the mayors all of the decision with regards to, well, not all of the decision, but taking out from the mayors what used to be the only decision making with regards to the production of public space and development, right? With the creation of decentralized planning entities, these institutions have produced studies, have produced planning that provide a different kind of guidance other than just the capital gain and of course the political gain, which is what many mayors respond to. So we used to have a very top-down approach at local level. The local planning institutes are doing sort of a hybrid, little by little. Hopefully it becomes something much more collective. But point being is that it is happening. And in that context, this second project, Vista Cerro Grande Linear Park in Chihuahua City, is important for us because it was the opportunity for us to engage with a project commissioned to us by the local planning institute of Chihuahua. We were asked to do a linear park, and just like that, when we arrived to the site, we realized that the right of way where the park was meant to be was actually a quite thriving, active weekend market. By the way, many of the things that are sold here are used clothes, tires, tools, you name it, that are imported from the US. Trying to mitigate food deserts, but also a clothing desert, you name it. So we integrated into the project something that was not, for sure, certainly part of the fee, which was a community engagement process to understand what we realized very clear we didn't understood. It's one of those areas of towns in which we had never been before. After this process, we confirmed the obvious thing that the market is important for the community, but there are also other significant preoccupations, which include the mitigation of crime and violence, the availability of public lighting during the night to mitigate risks, and we decided to integrate that into the project. The project was shelved for a few years until it was picked up again by another major, and it was quickly implemented, including the this kind of community spaces to provide shade, very minimal landscape approach, all arid species, but fundamentally pavement, very simple materiality to be able to implement a 1 mile long park with a $2 million budget. Most importantly for us is this, right? A project that is welcoming what a very important and critical part of the economic and social activity of the neighborhood. And so far it seems that it's working well. So from this project, I had the chance to be invited by the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, to lead a project for what I think about as public space recovery or public space reclamation in very low income or low income subsidized neighborhoods in northern Mexican cities. Technically speaking, it was a project that hybridized existing methods, crime prevention through environmental design, youth at risk, and gender-based, and the prevention of gender-based violence. We were tasked as an external entity, USAID, hiring me to kind of strategize the project, but serve as technical support to local governments to implement a very diverse approach to the reclaim public space, but fundamentally to lower the incidence of crime and violence in neighborhoods that were selected precisely because of that. So the public spaces that we were trying to reclaim, in addition to the streets, are parks like this, parks with very little spatial quality, with very little activity, in subsidized neighborhoods that look like this. A very significant percentage of this housing is abandoned because it lacks quality. It's far away from work, play, and commercial centers. Some parts were actually used as dumps during the construction process. What used to be a creek was channelized like this, and therefore lost all spatial qualities. These are photos of the neighborhood in Monterrey. Lack of maintenance. So these locations of the neighborhoods, a pilot project trying to test a methodology in which the expert was, of course, thinking about the integration of the built environment, but also about people with regards to, again, young people, prevention of gender-based violence. And there were, of course, a number of experts in each one of these areas working with the local governments, including graphic design to brand the project. As you can see here, very positive, messaging. We, of course, did not message this project as a project that was meant to lower down crime in your neighborhood. It was about you being proud about your neighborhood and being active. Right? So the neighborhood in Monterrey Metro, was very intensively analyzed through a series of community workshops, working with different groups within the community, with women, specifically mothers, who are usually very engaged in these kind of projects. Also with teenagers, who you usually have to work in different groups so that different groups open up and really tell about what their issues are, what the problems are, and what solutions they see with regards to the improvement of their neighborhoods. Lucha Libre helps to bring people in, of course. We also, part of the project was also convincing the companies, the employers, to participate into this project. This is a presentation we did to a group of employers from Guadalupe and Monterrey. The project spatially is very simple, right? Identify key locations for quick interventions or trust construction projects. And then over time, kind of be more ambitious in the interventions, all the way down to be as ambitious as to reclaim that concrete channel as a vibrant public space for this community. In the case of the neighborhood in Chihuahua City, isolated in the northern part of the city, after doing mapping of crime and violence, identifying these epicenters, and also very important part of the project, retraining of public officers, right? Fundamentally, what we're trying to propose is there needs to be a different relationship between the local government and the neighborhood. There needs to be a different relationship between the police and the teenagers. There needs to be a new spirit in that relationship. So part of the project had to do with training public officers on, this is the way we're going to do this. This is going to be about communication as opposed to a top-down approach to everything. You are going to listen to the people are going to be more responsive to you, and you, of course, are going to be invested with a responsibility in a very different way. So also eventually translates into spatial strategies that look like this, but these include a little bit of everything from signage, right? Trying to, the simple things that we give for granted in many places. There are no streets, there's no street signage. We can do that. We can organize young people to do public art with positive messaging, and implemented a number of interventions like that. We can implement street signage to mitigate risks, working with schools. Here, this woman here was a mayor at the time, and she is now the governor of the state. So I do think that this approach was helpful in her political ambitions, right? Obviously. We also included into the workshops that we organized, teaching how to grow a tree in an environment like this one, right? How much of an excavation you need to do to grow a tree, how do you establish a tree over time, and then we gave out the trees. Unfortunately, not the species that we would like to distribute, because those are not really available, but it's better to have a tree than not to have a tree. And then we also recruited local schools of architecture, which performed additional fundraising to implement with and for the community a series of interventions, very low budget interventions, which at least temporarily provided shelter from the sun, a place to play for the children, and of course the whole process was lots of fun, as you can see. Probably the most important part of the project, and of which I am most proud of, is the project ecosystem. As we were trying to coordinate and put together a strategy, right? How are we going to work together? Right? How do we regain trust? How do you reestablish these connections, or how do you create connections? I think that we don't teach enough of this. Actually, nobody taught me this in school, right? I think it's very important. Right? It is not easy, and of course you don't do it alone. But this constellation of relationships was, of course, critical for a project like this one, which is more than just a built environment. It's about triggering a social process. Right? Now, the project in Monterrey Metro was not successful. It didn't get political traction. The mayor was not really interested, but it was not the case in Chihuahua City. The mayor, now governor, was interested, and it was successful. We did baseline studies. We confirmed that there was less crime after the implementation of a series of multiple actions of over 1.5 years. So the city decided to implement the same program in additional neighborhoods in the city and make it part of the local strategies as to recover public space. So here we are training the neighborhood managers in the method and looking at the maps produced with the neighbors. And then, of course, a very important part of it, getting back with USAID and the planning officers of the city into the systematization of the project. So we did all of this. This is what worked. This is what doesn't work. If you're going to do it this way, so that it's down in writing in a 300-page document so that it can be replicated and improved over time. I have time, right? Okay. I have time until... okay. So 2 more projects. Very quickly, in Ambos Nogales, I have been collaborating with my friend and colleague, Francisco Lara Valencia from Arizona State University and others through the granting of a couple of grants from what was then in 2010, the Border Environment Cooperation Commission, and in 2020, the North American Development Bank. These projects have had to do with fundamentally how to manage water in Ambas Nogales, Nogales, Arizona, Nogales, Sonora. You know, that's the border, Mexico and the US. Both cities are Nogales. The objective image is City of Green Creeks. Nogales is a Spanish word for pecan tree. It used to be that these creeks were full of pecan trees and, of course, many oak trees, etc. Of course, mostly nowadays gone due to irresponsible urbanization. But another fundamental problem that Ambas Nogales share is flooding, as I will explain. So the whole point of the study was how do we develop strategies to mitigate flooding and at the same time enhance the accessibility and the opportunity to enjoy public space of quality. So the shared watershed of Ambas Nogales, which is a tributary to the Colorado River, is, as you can see here, most of it is in Mexico, and most of the people is in Mexico. Both cities happen because of the establishment of the border, and they have shared over their history successive floods, which have destroyed their infrastructure. Every year in Nogales, Sonora, Mexico, for sure, every year there's drownings happening because of the fact that streets, that urbanized creeks continue to operate as creeks. There is no underwater, there is very little underwater, underground water management systems. So the street is a creek when it rains. And because of this economic relationship established by NAFTA and now the new name, which I forgot right now, but you know, there's NAFTA, TEMEC, right? NAFTA #2, right? Nogales has grown much more rapidly than Nogales, Sonora, than Nogales, Arizona. The underground infrastructure has failed a number of times. It literally has exploded because of the pressure of water, and also because of the debris and trash that is carried when it rains. Actually, at this photo, when it blew up, apparently it blew up because the border enforcement in the US built a fence within the underground channel because there was smuggling happening underground. So they built a fence without letting the local authorities know about it, right? So with the next rain and all of that debris coming down, it created a blockade and it blew up suddenly. Back there, you can see the border wall in downtown Nogales. Right? This is an image of the reconstruction doing the same, right? So that thing was blocked by a fence, right? It may blow up again, I don't know. Right? So the point is that another important thing that we sometimes do not know is that I commented on the reservoirs in Mexico to create this, to enact this agreement between the US and Mexico for water sharing. Infrastructure is paid in Mexico, is paid with US tax dollars, right? Including this, because most of the water comes down from the part of the basin, which is in Mexico. Water detention infrastructures like this one are built with US tax dollars, right? So if that's going to happen, how do we do it better than just being that, right? How do you create public space of quality to regenerate the lost green creeks? So we produced a strategy, I'll go fast here, in which we identify a series of sites for different parks, and which would be, of course, locations for water management infrastructure, and also thought about this as a sequence of water management capacities from higher upstream to down, or not down, but closer to the main river, which in this case is the Nogales Creek. If you're interested on this, there was an article published on the project by Landscape Architecture magazine titled, I love the title, Floods That Know No Bounds. And it was also published in Spanish, Inundaciones que no conocen límites. Right? So that project in 2010 took us to a second round in which we were now able to expand the idea to Nogales, Arizona. And very much with the same approach, with identifying nodes in relationship to public space opportunities and also water management opportunities, trying to think about how this could be connected into a trail system, acknowledging that it would be potentially impossible in many cases to actually do something like this. I mean, the connection of all of these sites. And then, most importantly, developing pilot projects. In this case, we were interested in demonstrating that it could be done from the ground up, right? And we wanted to work with local communities, with local groups that were organized and were going to contribute with fairly small infrastructural interventions, which, if accumulated, could make it happen. And of course, working with students to develop these ideas is a structural part of what we do and why we do it. These are some projects done by the students. And then identifying a project that can be implemented as a pilot project, in this case, a middle school in Nogales, Sonora. And then organizing the parents, the school kids, to implement very simple projects, as you can see, very low budget, with donations, with donated time, with a grant, which was not also a very large grant, but it was good enough to make it happen, right? And digging trenches with hand labor to create infrastructures which look like this, at least during construction. Another important complexity to share here is that this was implemented during the first year of the pandemic, so it was quite complicated. A second project is this one in a residual space in another low-income neighborhood of Nogales, Sonora. And here I'm going to let you rest from my speech so that you can enjoy this quick video. redesign.
En este bonito barrio, y estoy muy contento de que todos ustedes estén aquí. Me gusta este proyecto. Gracias.
Okay. That's Francisco Lara. I would say that something fantastic has been to work with Francisco, who provides a planning perspective and the planning studies, and then we operate as the landscape architecture perspective. And it has hope to continue doing this for a long time. Now I need to finish with the lecture, but it's not letting me move forward. 1 second. Okay. Okay, there it goes. Okay. Final project. Well, more than a project is this is what I have been spending more time since that project second project in Ambas Nogales. Looking at the lower Rio Grande, Bravo Valley. Over there, people call it valley. It's actually a delta, but you know, that's how it goes. So here, you know, Rio Grande, Rio Bravo, J.B. Jackson published a fantastic article, which is titled Chihuahua as We Might Have Been. And I think at the time he was living in Albuquerque or Santa Fe, and he was a motorcycle person, right? So he would drive the motorcycle down and get to Chihuahua and write things like this, Chihuahuas we might have been. But one of the important ideas here is this, right? Rivers are meant to bring people together, not to keep them apart. This is an image of, an image of the typical image of surveillance in the border. In this specific location is in Roma, Texas, which is looking over the other side to Ciudad Miguel Alemán. And consider now this.
Mi madre, y me estoy acordando Real de Colima, dicen que yo no lo sé. Camino Real de Colima, dicen que yo no lo sé. En compañía de mi chata, de rodillas lo andaré. En compañía de mi chata, de rodillas lo andaré. Camino Real de Colima.
You get the idea, right? The city of Ciudad Miguel Alemán, their fairground is right there in the river, right? And that's where they get together to celebrate, to drink beer, to dance. And that's literally, that video is taken literally from where that Border Patrol officer was overlooking the other side, right? So you cannot do that, at least right now in the US, right? There is no opportunity to do that kind of gathering in the US side of the river, right? It's sort of really contradictory to what it should be, right? There's a plan for a binational park right now going on. That sounds like a fantastic initiative. Hopefully more of that will happen. But I guess the point I want to make is that it is not that it's not happening. As you can see, it happens here and there. So, coming back to the river, I was commenting on drought. This is an image from this year when there was no water. This section of the river, before it gets to El Paso, Texas, most of the water is taken up for agriculture. So between El Paso, Texas, and the connection of the Rio Conchos with the Rio Grande, Rio Bravo, that section of the river is the driest, right? Because the water has been taken. So this summer, in the Santa Elena Canyon, which is in Big Bend National Park, in the US side, it was dry, right? No water, we're taking it up, right? So consider that this is the way it looks in Google, dry as well. Puddles here and there this summer. A few years ago, I decided to put down some ideas in writing with an article which was titled Fundamentally Make the Rio Grande Grand Again, of course, in reference to the ongoing political rhetoric going on at the time. This is 2017. The article was picked up by a number of newspapers. I think this is by far the article that has had the most clicks that I have written. I can track that. They changed the title a number of times. This is the worst one, City La, green in the Rio Grande. Come on. But the whole idea is it has happened. This is not, we agreed, we have agreed in the past, the US and Mexico, to protect the river, protect the environment in the binational river, border region. So it's an opportunity for a multi-scalar, multi-government and governments future for this shared environment, from the state level to the county and municipalities in Mexico, considering, of course, water and multiple hierarchies of water drainage and management. Fundamentally, I think we can pick up on this, right? National parks, wildlife refuges, and other natural and protected areas, which exist in this case there, where I was talking about. Most people know with reason here in the US about the Big Bend National Park, but there are a number of protected areas in the Mexican side which emerged from a binational agreement, right? At the top level between Mexican presidents and American presidents to make this happen. And you can see here Roosevelt and President Manuel Ávila Camacho corresponding on this. I do not believe that this undertaking in the Big Bend will be complete until the entire park area in this region on both sides of the Rio Grande forms one great international park. Right? It has happened also more recently with in 2010 with President Calderon and President Obama agreeing that they signed an agreement to an understanding, right? A letter of understanding to recognize and designate the Big Bend Rio Bravo as a natural area of binational interest. Right? So why don't we do more of that? Why don't we do it here? For example, one of the most critical bird, bat, and butterfly migration flyways in the continent, right? The lower Rio Grande, Rio Bravo Delta Valley. There is in the US side a constellation of nature preserves, protected areas, most of which are private lands, foundation lands. A number of those are also Texas state parks. But fundamentally, what I want to point out is that there are none in Mexico. There's a very large one, a coastal one, as you can see there, but this is not urban, right? As is the case of, for example, as you were commenting, the Sabal Palm Sanctuary. Here are my students in February. This is the closest they got to Mexico because of travel restrictions, right? Looking at the Mexican side from one of those protected areas. So the mapping, of course, and the studios here eventually led to an opportunity. These are the locations of the studio projects, and very quickly showing you one image per each of the studio projects from the last spring semester. But I will probably speak more here. In a recent opportunity I had to collaborate with the University of Texas in San Antonio with the Center for Urban and Regional Planning Research and my colleague and friend Ian Kane to update the City of Weslaco comprehensive plan, a small city which is part of this binational metropolis of the lower Rio Grande Valley. A city which has beautiful nature preserves, and in this case, a Texas state park like the Estero Llano Grande, which is built. This wetland is a built wetland. It used to be an agricultural land. The wetland was created, the excavation was done with the sole purpose of recovering that lost habitat due to first agriculture, right, and second to urbanization, right? And of course, the lost habitat related to fixing the river, right? So that the river doesn't move anymore, and so that we have a fixed border. Right? So in the plan, which we also try to do through working with the community and stakeholders, we're also complicated. As you can see, we are wearing face masks. It was last year. Literally, the community workshops were done via Zoom. Not ideal, right? But also integrating our studio teaching into this, and developing a number of sections of the plan. I'm only going to show you the ones that I was leading as part of the team, which has to do with the City Parks Network and the Trail Network. But most importantly, the realization that it would seem that to a degree that the city is not where it is. Right? So there's bird watching is a very important activity here. Bird watchers from all over North America come down here because this is one of the few places in the US where you can see many birds, the tropical birds that you cannot see anywhere else in the United States, right? And it's also at the intersection of the flyway with the Rio Grande. So you can see it immediately. When you arrive, you immediately start looking at green birds and yellow birds here and there. So there's something there, obviously, right? But it was very interesting for us to see that there was a very clear disconnection, right? As if you can only address bird watching through foundations or through Texas state parks. The city doesn't do that, right? It's like, what? You know, so we fundamentally try to say you can do that, right? If you think about what you're doing through the way you manage of what you can manage in Texas, by the way, which is not much with a city, right? If what you can manage is trying to connect the dots and trying to leverage the opportunities for economic enhancement, but also for a reconciliation with the environment, right? So we integrated into the plan this vision of connecting habitats and thinking of birth and nature watching as part of the city's role and infrastructure in the planning. And unfortunately, the city, all of the lower Rio Grande Valley is subject to flooding, right? So there is a need for stormwater management infrastructure. Unfortunately, it is built like that, like a hole in the ground, right? So why? I don't know why. I mean, you have multiple examples here of new wetlands that can manage water, but recover habitats. So simple ideas that, you know, cities hopefully can start to realize they are empowered, and hopefully sometime soon we can jump across to the Mexican side and find a way to empower local communities to realize that there is also a role to be played when dealing with opportunities like this, and also in a place which recently has been unfortunately subject to very significant crime and violence crisis, in particular in that part of Mexico, state of Tamaulipas. So how to leverage, right, is the question, and empower across political levels. Okay, thank you. I don't know if there's time for questions, but
There's always time for
okay.
So thank you all. Thank you, Gabriel, for what a wonderful talk that was.
Thank you.
So many rich examples. Who's got questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. This semester, my studio and another studio, we're looking at migration. And and so we're talking about the movement of people, but also comparing the movement of commodities too, so how they move in different ways. It seems, if you make a product to sell, a commodity, it moves with much more fluidity than human life, and certainly we're looking at human life in these areas that is in distress. So I'm curious that it seems like those things that we're looking at have this metabolism that, whether it succeeds in crossing the border or not, that is rather quick in a way, or the attempt is to be quick. It seems your efforts in a way are looking at things that move slowly. Yeah? That the efforts, whether they're local efforts to rebuild certain areas, build certain areas, or to affect the landscape. Yeah, these things are working slowly, or bird sanctuaries. These things are slow. They're at a very different rhythm. I'm just curious, because you're in this area of border, how do you reconcile? Do you look at these two metabolisms? Yeah, one that is sort of very fast, which is maybe not your interest, and one that is much slower, that is about nature and the ebb and flow of nature.
Yeah.
I don't know if that I conveyed myself.
Well, well, thank you. I like to think that I embrace what takes time, right? And if we focus only on, for example, a president comes in 2017, right, and changes the conversation, but fundamentally, over the long run, it's just a moment in a much longer trajectory, right? And I think that's what I am interested in, right? And not so much that, interval, right? I think, generally speaking, over time, I think we have improved, right? The relationship is getting better, right, over time, with hiccups. But I think it can happen. I see the role of, for example, the dissemination of things that we have done through agreements as something that I realize that a lot of people don't know about. That's and it's a simple way of thinking. Well, we can let people know about this, right? We have done this, right? And this is something that we can do as academics, right? So that's with regards to that trajectory. Then the other one that I am probably more invested or connected is with social change, right? I think there is a need to empower people, right? To make people believe that they can do change, right? And you know, to do that, you can start small, and then over time that should accumulate. I don't care, you know, it's not about me, right? It's about you know kickstarting a process, or maybe just letting someone know that yes, you can do something about your neighborhood, right? And then next down the line, that's going to be part of that change. And also an important thing that after meeting with many local government authorities, the realization that they are also in the same boat. They don't feel empowered, right? You know, this anecdote of the federal government building a fence inside of the drain, right? And the authorities of Nogales, Arizona, telling us they didn't tell us, you know, we didn't knew this. It's like, what the hell, you know? Or in one other visit to Nogales, Arizona, talking about flooding, one of the municipal local authorities in Nogales, Arizona, saying that this particular person in urban planning in Nogales, Arizona, was being invited to planning meetings in Nogales, Sonora, so that there could be binational planning, right? Let's plan this together, right? And in a simple meeting, I asked, okay, so are you attending the meetings? And the response was, oh no, I don't have time. Okay, and then I realized, well, this guy speaks Spanish, you know, he's Mexican American, and then I realized, how often do you go to Nogales, Sonora? And his reply was, oh, every weekend to visit my mom. And I was, you see, what is going on, right? There are, I think the point I want to make is that there are very, very simple things that can change, right? As we say in Mexico, the switch, you know. But again, the importance of putting together in the end what I think is a new mode of governance, right? In places that, as I tried to explain as part of the context, places that feel very isolated. Culturally, they feel very isolated, right? Nobody cares, right? We are on our own. And I don't blame them. I don't blame people. You know, that's true, right? When the U.S. invaded central Mexico through Chihuahua, the federal government of Mexico concentrated to the defense around Mexico City and left the rest of the country. You handle it on your own, right? So there is a legacy of that, right? But the point is that in that context, there is a need to empower, right? It will take time. Yeah.
What's the biggest challenge when it comes to working with the communities, especially for like so like the other bodies and talking to other bodies? Nobody's.
Yes.
What is the hardest thing of working with the community?
Well, in the last couple of years, of course, the pandemic, you know, I would be presenting different, I would be in the photos. I'm joking, my students would be in the photos implementing the projects, right? That has been certainly complicated, but I think the most difficult thing to do is to gain the trust of people. And this is why, for example, in the USAID project, the first phase of the projects are usually referred to as the trust construction projects, because you have to build that trust. You are oftentimes working with communities that have a long historical record of politicians or governments getting there saying, I'm going to help you, just vote for me, right? They vote for them, nothing happens, right? Or whatever, NGOs that, get there, do something and then disappear. So there's a lot of skepticism on the people of neighborhoods, which are used to, oh, here comes again this person from somewhere else saying that something is going to happen, nothing happens. That's a critical part. And I think when you actually do something, and not only that, you do it with them, that really helps. Right? But it's not easy. It requires a lot of time. And the project for USAID, I was living in Austin at the time, Austin, Texas. I was, going to Mexico once a month or something like that. So the point is that you need boots on the ground, right? To do that, that's fundamental, which is why we had a technical team on the ground with local experts, people that are experts with community engagement, and also the local schools of architecture who were the ones that were there to actually make it happen. Right? That's a complicated part. Now, there's another important thing to say. Patricia Wilson, a former colleague of mine at UT Austin, has published a book on this actually, right? And it is not easy to gain the trust of anyone, for that matter, right? But of a community, it's not easy. You need to have a certain kind of personality. You have to be able to communicate in a particular way. You have to look a particular way, right, to gain the trust of people. Right? So there is a set of skills that it's fundamental for that to happen, and it doesn't happen always, right? And you make assumptions too. You make assumptions that you are able to communicate effectively. You are not communicating effectively, right? So I guess the lesson here is that it is really personal too, right? It's really, really human, right, in the end. Yes.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was like really integral. You touched so many different aspects.
Thank you.
And that picture that you showed in the very beginning of the border without like physical limits really, shocked me, because I never imagined that the US-Mexican border could actually look like that. And that was only 20 years ago.
Yeah. So,
by the end of your presentation, when you started talking about the full vision for, the border, it seems to me that there is a tension between like the national spatial politics of the border and this idea of integration and looking at the environment and the landscape as it is, as a continuous territory. And in that discussion, I wonder, how do you envision the role of architects, planners, designers in that political vision of integration? Because it's easy to say, well, it's the political will of presidents and governors, but which is our role? Which is our disciplinary role?
Well, I was having a conversation on this with Catherine. Well, the first thing that I think is fundamental is that we all, architects, landscape architects, planners, they don't need to know, they know. But architects, well, it's I think most planners know.
I've always been architect.
Yeah, but well, yes, you're right, not everyone, but I guess that designers, let's put it, I think that we need to really teach and make an effort on that, to teach and to insist on that we are political stakeholders professionally and not just as individuals, right? And we have a particular capacity to do things for the good or for the bad. I find it very frustrating often with the difficulty of sometimes, feeling that this is effectively embraced by many students in the design professions, right? It's almost like there's a lot of people that just, oh, this is politics, and I don't want to do anything with it. And I'm thinking everything's politics, but so that's the first thing. I think teaching on it, and it may seem that in some cases, in certain contexts, it's a kind of a taboo theme, right? Like you don't speak about this, right? Because this is architecture, or because this is about plants, right? Or you see, so I think that's the most important thing that is easily, well, relatively easily understood. The other important thing is that I was commenting on the importance on training with regards to thinking about the built environment as strategies, as opposed to building something only, right? Physical. Right? I mentioned nobody taught me that, and sort of everything that I have done with my partners, or through not just professionally, but also with partnering with planners, has been kind of a learning curve, right? Of methods that exist and have been implemented for a long time that nobody told me about when I was in school, right? So that's another important fundamental thing. And the other one is, the related to the previous one, is that, as some would say, I do think we have to let go authorship, right? Forget about that, right? That's not the way it's going to happen. So it's about process, right? And the contributions accumulating incrementally over time.
I think we've had a wonderful evening, and
Thank you.
we'll continue with a few of us going to dinner, but I did want to ask you to join me in thanking Gabriel again for this great time. Thank you. And to say that, just a reminder that next week the lecture will be on Wednesday evening in this room, and we will have Professor Claudia Lomnitz visiting us from Columbia University. Who is Burns. You should come. As is Professor